The cowboy froze when he saw the bundle of letters in her hands, because every one of them carried his name, and none had ever reached him. Snow hammered the walls of the mountain-lined shack. The iron stove crackled. Ruth's fingers trembled around a faded envelope as Isaiah stared across the tiny room. Outside, the wind howled through the pines. Inside, 20 feet of silence felt heavier than 3 years apart. Then she unfolded the first letter, and what she found made neither of them speak. If stories like this move you, tell us where you're watching from and join us for the journey. Autumn always arrived early in Dry Willow Valley. The wind came first. It moved through the pine-covered ridges above town and swept down across the cattle pastures, carrying the scent of dry grass and distant rain. Fence gates creaked. Stable doors rattled. Dust rolled across the wagon road that cut through the valley like a faded ribbon. Ruth Carter was sorting mail when the rumor found her. The telegraph office sat beside the general store, a narrow wooden building with 2 front windows and a brass bell above the door. Most mornings followed the same rhythm. Freight receipts, ranch notices, catalog orders, letters from sons working cattle drives hundreds of miles away. She was stamping an envelope bound for Cheyenne when Martha Bell stepped inside. The older woman removed her gloves slowly. That alone was unusual. Martha never moved slowly unless she carried news. "You heard?" she asked. Ruth glanced up. "Heard what?" Martha studied her for a moment. "Isaiah Walker came back yesterday." The stamp hit the paper harder than it should have. A sharp thud, nothing else. Outside, a wagon rolled past the window. Somewhere down the street, a hammer struck metal at the blacksmith shop. Life continued. Ruth placed the envelope aside. "I see." Martha waited. No further reaction came. After a few seconds, she nodded and left. The bell above the door jingled once. Silence settled back into the room. Only then did Ruth notice she had stamped the same envelope twice. She stared at the duplicate mark for a long moment. 3 years. 3 years since Isaiah Walker had ridden out of Dry Willow Valley with a cattle outfit headed south. 3 years without a letter. 3 years without an explanation. The day moved on. Customers came and went. Benjamin Carter stopped by for tobacco and coffee beans. Sheriff Caleb Boone collected a telegram. Children ran across the churchyard chasing each other through drifting leaves. By evening, the sky had turned the color of old copper. Ruth locked the telegraph office and started home. Instead, her feet carried her toward the church. The old fence along the western side had been damaged during spring storms. Half the posts leaned sideways. A lantern glowed there now, and beside it stood a man with a hammer in his hand. Isaiah Walker. He was driving a fresh rail into place. His coat was dusty from travel. His hat sat lower than she remembered. The years had added lines around his eyes and broadened his shoulders. But she recognized him instantly. Isaiah noticed her before she spoke. The hammer stopped. For a moment, neither moved. Wind swept through the grass between them. "Evening, Ruth." His voice sounded exactly the same. Steady, quiet, dangerous only because it felt familiar. "Evening." Neither smiled. Neither looked away. The unfinished fence stood between them. "So you're back," she said. "Looks that way." That almost made her laugh, almost. Instead, she folded her hands together. "You planning to stay?" Isaiah glanced toward the valley below. Lights flickered inside distant ranch houses. "I think so." Another silence followed. Not comfortable, not hostile, just crowded with years neither knew how to discuss. Finally, Isaiah set the hammer down. His eyes met hers. There was something different in them tonight. Something heavier. "I found something," he said. Ruth felt her heartbeat stumble. What kind of something? He hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket. His fingers touched something hidden there, but he didn't take it out. "It belongs to you." The wind rattled the fence. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled beyond the mountains. Ruth waited. Isaiah didn't continue. "What is it?" she asked quietly. His gaze drifted toward the darkening horizon. "Tomorrow," he said. Then he looked back at her. "Meet me tomorrow morning." The first cold drop of rain struck the dust between them. Neither moved. Neither spoke. And for the first time in 3 years, Ruth Carter walked home with more questions than answers. That night, she sat alone inside the telegraph office long after the lamps should have been extinguished. The old mail cabinet stood against the wall. Thousands of letters had passed through those wooden drawers. Thousands of lives. Thousands of secrets. Outside, the wind grew stronger. Rain tapped softly against the windows, and somewhere in the darkness beyond town, a storm was moving toward Dry Willow Valley. Ruth stared at the cabinet and thought about the look on Isaiah's face. Not regret, not guilt. Something else. Something waiting to be uncovered. And for the first time in years, sleep did not come easily. Ruth finally drifted off sometime before dawn. When she opened her eyes again, pale light was already pushing through the curtains of the room above the telegraph office. The storm had passed during the night. The streets below were damp, and puddles reflected strips of gray Wyoming sky. She dressed quietly, a plain brown skirt, a cream-colored blouse, her worn boots by the door. Downstairs, she lit the stove and poured hot water through coffee grounds. The smell filled the room. Usually, it settled her nerves. Not this morning. The clock above the telegraph desk read 7:20 when she locked the office and started toward the edge of town. Isaiah was waiting exactly where he said he would be, outside the abandoned freight depot. The building sat beyond the cattle loading yard near the tracks. Years of snow and wind had weakened the roof until part of it collapsed the previous winter. A wagon stood nearby. Isaiah leaned against it with his hat in his hands. Neither greeted the other right away. The morning carried that strange stillness that comes after rain. Finally, Isaiah motioned toward the wagon bed. A metal strongbox sat there. It was scratched and rusted around the hinges. The lock had already been broken. Ruth frowned. "What is it?" Isaiah climbed into the wagon and lifted the lid. The sound seemed louder than it should have. Then he stepped aside. Ruth moved closer. At first she didn't understand what she was seeing. Bundles of letters. Dozens of them. Tied with fading string. Stacked carefully inside. Some yellowed with age. Some stained from moisture. Some unopened. Her eyes narrowed. Then she froze. One envelope sat near the top. She knew the handwriting instantly. Her own. The air left her lungs. Slowly, she picked it up. Her fingers brushed across her name, then across another name written beneath it. Isaiah Walker. She stared. The letter was dated 2 years and 8 months earlier, the month after Isaiah left Dry Willow Valley. "I wrote this," she whispered. Isaiah nodded once. "I know." Ruth looked up. The expression on his face made her stomach tighten. Not because he seemed angry, because he seemed tired. The kind of tired a person becomes after carrying the same question for years. She untied the string, opened the envelope. The paper crackled softly. Her own words stared back at her. "Safe travels. Come home when you can. Dry Willow isn't the same without you." She remembered writing it, remembered sealing it, remembered placing it into the outgoing mail bag herself. But she had never received an answer, not once. Her hand trembled slightly. Isaiah reached into the box, pulled out another envelope, then another, then another. Each addressed to her, each written in his handwriting. Ruth stared at them. For a long moment she couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't think. The world seemed to narrow until only those letters existed. "I wrote every month," Isaiah said quietly. The words hung between them. "I thought you stopped answering." Ruth swallowed. "I never got any of these." "I know." The silence that followed felt heavier than grief. It felt like lost time. She sat on an overturned crate beside the wagon. The coffee she'd brought in a tin cup had already gone cold. Neither noticed. Isaiah picked up one of the letters. His thumb rested against the folded paper. "There were days I nearly came back." He stared toward the valley. "I'd write another letter instead." Ruth looked down at the stack in her lap. There had been days she waited beside the telegraph window until sunset. Days she checked incoming mail twice, 3 times, certain something had gone wrong. Certain eventually he would explain. Eventually he would write. Eventually he would come home. Eventually never came. Until now. The wind shifted. A loose board knocked softly against the freight depot wall. Ruth opened another envelope, then another. Every page felt like opening a door into years that should have belonged to both of them. Years neither had actually lived. By late morning, the sun had climbed above the ridge. Still, they sat beside the wagon, reading, remembering, falling silent. The pain wasn't loud. That somehow made it worse. No accusations, no raised voices, just 2 people discovering that neither had walked away. Someone had cut the road between them. Isaiah finally reached into the bottom of the box. His hand paused. Then he removed a single envelope, different from the rest. The paper was darker, the postmark clearer. His eyes narrowed. "What is it?" Ruth asked. Isaiah handed it over. She examined the stamp. Then her expression changed. The letter hadn't traveled through another territory, hadn't come from another state, hadn't been lost on a cattle route. The postmark came from Dry Willow Valley itself. Local handling, local sorting, local delivery. Someone inside their own town had touched this letter. Someone had seen the names. Someone had made a choice. Ruth slowly lifted her eyes. Isaiah was already looking at her. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. For the first time, the mystery had a direction. And somewhere in Dry Willow Valley, a person who thought the past was buried had no idea it was beginning to rise. The next few days settled into an uneasy rhythm. Ruth opened the telegraph office every morning at 7. Isaiah worked his ranch. From a distance, life appeared unchanged. But beneath the ordinary sounds of wagon wheels and cattle bells, something had shifted. Every spare hour was spent chasing the past. The first place they looked was the telegraph office itself. Old ledgers filled a cabinet behind Ruth's desk. Dust coated the corners. Ink had faded on some of the pages. She and Isaiah sat at the small work table near the stove, turning sheets carefully beneath the yellow glow of a kerosene lamp. Benjamin Carter stopped by one evening carrying a sack of apples. He stood quietly beside them, watching page after page pass beneath their hands. "Sometimes," he said, setting the sack down, "people don't lose things. Other people move them." Neither Ruth nor Isaiah answered. The old scout nodded once and left. The words stayed behind. 3 days later, Sheriff Caleb Boone joined them. The sheriff removed his spectacles and studied one of the freight manifests. His finger stopped beside a name, then another, and another. "That's strange." Ruth looked up. "What is?" Boone turned the ledger around. During a staffing shortage nearly 3 years earlier, temporary assistants had been assigned to the mail station. The name appeared several times. Evelyn Mercer. Ruth stared. She remembered those months. The station had been busier than usual. A cattle boom had brought extra freight, extra correspondence, extra confusion, missing envelopes, delayed deliveries, small mistakes. Nothing alarming, nothing important enough to question. At least that's what she had believed then. Isaiah leaned back in his chair. His jaw tightened. How often was she here? Ruth scanned the entries. Several afternoons each week. The room fell silent. Outside, wind rattled the telegraph wires. The sound seemed louder than usual. By the following afternoon, they rode to the Mercer property. The Mercer house sat on a rise overlooking the valley. White paint, wide porch, rows of cottonwoods turning gold beneath the autumn sky. Evelyn Mercer answered the door herself. She wore a dark blue dress and held a basket of laundry against her hip. The moment she saw Isaiah, something changed in her expression. Not surprise. Recognition. The kind that arrives when someone realizes the thing they feared has finally come. No one spoke for a moment. Then Ruth held out one of the letters. We found these. Evelyn's eyes dropped to the envelope. The color slowly left her face. The basket slipped from her hands. A shirt drifted onto the porch boards. Still, she said nothing. Isaiah remained calm. That somehow made everything heavier. Did you know about them? He asked. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. Just once. When she opened them again, the answer was already there. Years seemed to settle across her shoulders all at once. Yes. The word barely carried beyond the porch. Ruth felt her fingers tighten around the letter. Not anger. Not yet. Just disbelief. Evelyn looked toward the valley below, toward the church, toward the telegraph office, toward the years that could not be returned. At first I thought it would only be a few letters, she said quietly. No one interrupted. I told myself he'd forget. Her gaze drifted toward Isaiah. He never did. Isaiah stood perfectly still. And you kept doing it. Evelyn nodded. A tear escaped before she brushed it away. Not dramatically, almost impatiently, as though she no longer felt entitled to it. I kept thinking I'd fix it later. She laughed softly, a broken sound. But later kept becoming another month, then another year. The porch fell silent again. No shouting, no accusations, just the weight of truth finally being spoken aloud. Ruth studied the woman standing before her. For years she had imagined a villain, someone cruel, someone calculating. Instead, she found a person trapped inside the consequences of her own envy. Then Evelyn said something that changed everything. It wasn't only me. Isaiah's eyes narrowed. Neither he nor Ruth spoke. Evelyn looked down at the porch boards. He told me it was better this way. The wind stirred the fallen laundry at her feet. Ruth felt something cold move through her chest. Who told you? Evelyn hesitated. For the first time since they arrived, real fear appeared in her face. Not fear of them, fear of someone else. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. My brother. Owen Mercer. The name hung between them, heavy, unwelcome. And suddenly the stolen letters no longer looked like a story about heartbreak. They looked like the beginning of something much larger. Something neither Ruth nor Isaiah yet understood. Something that had never been about love at all. The first snow arrived earlier than expected. By the middle of November, white patches clung to the hills above Dry Willow Valley. Frost covered fence rails before sunrise. Horse troughs formed thin sheets of ice overnight. Life in town continued, but attention had settled beneath it. Owen Mercer still smiled when he passed people on Main Street, still attended church, still shook hands after town meetings. Yet every time Ruth saw him now, she found herself wondering how many years he had spent watching her without saying a word. 3 days after speaking with Evelyn, Ruth climbed the narrow staircase inside the county records building. The room smelled of old paper and dust. Shelves lined every wall, land surveys, tax records, property transfers, water rights. She spent hours sorting through leather-bound volumes while weak winter sunlight filtered through the windows. Near dusk, she found something. A folded survey map, then another. And beneath them, a legal filing carrying Owen Mercer's signature. Ruth sat very still. The documents described a spring. Not just any spring. The spring located beneath her property. A deep underground water source that fed several smaller creeks running across neighboring ranches. If control of the land ever changed hands, whoever owned that spring would hold influence over much of the valley's future water supply. Ruth stared at the papers. Suddenly, pieces began fitting together. This had never been about keeping Isaiah away because of Evelyn's feelings alone. Money was involved. Land was involved. Power was involved. She carefully folded the documents and carried them home. That evening, Isaiah sat across from her at the telegraph office. A lantern flickered between them. Neither touched the coffee growing cold beside their elbows. When Ruth showed him the records, he read every page twice. Then he slowly removed his hat. He knew. Ruth nodded. He knew before you left. The room fell silent. Outside, snowflakes drifted through the darkness. Isaiah stared toward the window. 3 years. 3 years stolen because someone saw profit where other people saw a future. The storm arrived the next afternoon. It came down from the mountains fast. By noon, wind was screaming through the valley. By 2 o'clock, visibility had nearly vanished. The telegraph wires sagged beneath accumulating ice. Then one line snapped. Communication with neighboring towns disappeared. By sunset, Dry Willow Valley stood alone beneath a wall of blowing snow. Benjamin Carter was supposed to be home before dark. He never arrived. Ruth stood beside the window watching the storm. Isaiah appeared at the door minutes later. Snow covered his coat and hat. Benjamin's horse came back. The words hit hard. Ruth immediately grabbed her coat. I'm going. So am I. They rode out together. The storm swallowed the road almost immediately. Snow stung their faces. Branches bent beneath ice. The horses moved carefully across terrain neither rider could fully see. Eventually, they found Benjamin. Not injured, not lost. Just trapped inside an abandoned supply shed after his wagon axle broke. But he wasn't alone. 2 men stood nearby. Mercer ranch hands. And scattered across the shed floor were several legal documents. Transfer papers, property claims. Benjamin's expression told the rest of the story. Someone had been pressuring him to sign. Nothing violent, nothing dramatic. Just steady pressure applied during the worst weather of the year. The kind of pressure Owen Mercer preferred. Isaiah helped Benjamin onto his horse. The older man gripped Ruth's arm briefly. Don't let that man take what's yours. The journey home proved impossible. The storm had become too dangerous. By nightfall, they were forced to seek shelter inside a remote line shack used by telegraph repair crews high in the foothills. The cabin was barely larger than a tool shed. 1 iron stove, 2 wooden bunks, a stack of firewood. Nothing else. Wind battered the walls. Snow hissed against the windows. For the first time in years, there was nowhere left to go. No town, no telegraph office, no unfinished conversations waiting for another day. Isaiah fed wood into the stove. Ruth sat quietly near the fire. Orange light danced across the room. Neither spoke for a long while. Then Ruth looked up. I waited. Isaiah slowly raised his eyes. The storm howled outside, but inside the room everything seemed still. I waited longer than I should have. Her voice remained calm. No tears, no drama, just honesty. I thought eventually you'd write. Isaiah stared into the fire. I did. The answer came immediately, without hesitation, without defense. Just truth. For a moment, neither looked away. 3 years sat between them. 3 years neither could recover. And yet for the first time, those years no longer felt like a wall, only a wound, a painful one, but something that might finally heal. Outside, the blizzard continued across dry Willow Valley. Inside the little line shack, two people who had spent years living inside silence finally stopped hiding from it. And when morning came, they would have to return home and confront a man whose influence stretched across nearly every corner of the valley. This time, they would not face him separately. The storm began to weaken shortly after sunrise. By mid-morning, the worst of the wind had passed. Snow still covered the valley roads, but wagons could move again, and the church bell rang once to let people know the town was waking up. Ruth rode beside Isaiah the entire way back. Neither spoke much. There was no need. The silence between them felt different now. Not empty, not uncertain. Simply shared. Over the next several days, Dry Willow Valley became a place of meetings, records, and difficult truths. Sheriff Caleb Boone spent hours reviewing county documents. Benjamin Carter provided every paper he had kept over the years: receipts, property notices, old correspondence, even a weathered notebook containing dates and conversations he had recorded long ago out of habit. The pieces slowly came together, and once they did, the picture was impossible to ignore. The town meeting was held inside the church on a cold Thursday evening. Lanterns hung from the walls. Snowmelt dripped steadily from the roof outside. Nearly everyone in the valley came. Ranchers, store owners, freight drivers, families who had lived there for decades. Owen Mercer arrived wearing his usual dark coat and confident expression. For years, that expression had been enough. Not this time. Sheriff Boone stood near the front. Benjamin sat beside Ruth. Isaiah remained a few rows behind her. Close enough. Not imposing. Just there. One by one, the records were presented. Survey maps, water rights filings, property documents, witness statements. Then came Evelyn. The church grew completely still when she stood. She did not try to excuse herself. She did not try to explain away the years. She simply told the truth. About the letters. About the conversations with her brother. About the promises that had seemed harmless until they became something she could no longer stop. When she finished, nobody spoke for several moments. Owen finally stood. For the first time, he looked smaller than Ruth remembered. Not because of his height, because the room no longer leaned toward him. The room had leaned away. By the end of the evening, the outcome was clear. The legal claim failed. The pressure on Benjamin ended. The hidden plans surrounding the spring collapsed. And Owen Mercer left the church alone. Outside, snow crunched beneath his boots as he disappeared into the darkness. No one followed. No one needed to. Some battles end quietly. This one did. Life settled after that. Winter slowly loosened its grip on the valley. The telegraph lines were repaired. Freight wagons returned. Children once again crossed the churchyard after Sunday services. And every few days, Isaiah Walker appeared at the telegraph office, sometimes with tools, sometimes with lumber, sometimes carrying nothing at all. One afternoon, he repaired a broken shutter that had rattled for months. Another day, he fixed a loose step at the front entrance. He never announced what he was doing. He simply noticed things and handled them. Ruth noticed that too. The same way she noticed how he always brushed snow from the porch before she opened in the morning, or how he made certain Benjamin never carried heavy sacks by himself, or how he always removed his hat before stepping inside. Small things, steady things, the kind that are easy to overlook until you realize they have become part of your day. By early spring, snowmelt rushed down from the mountains. The valley turned green again. Creeks filled. Wildflowers appeared along the fence lines. One evening, Isaiah asked Ruth to take a ride with him. Nothing more. Just a ride. They followed a narrow trail north of town until they reached the spring. The spring. the one that had caused so much trouble. Water flowed clear and cold from beneath a rocky hillside. Sunlight reflected across its surface. For a while they simply stood there listening. Water over stone, wind through grass, a hawk circling high above the valley. Then Isaiah spoke. "We lost 3 years." Ruth looked at him. His gaze remained fixed on the water, not because he was afraid to look at her, because he meant every word. "I don't intend to lose another day." That was all. No speech, no crowd, no grand performance, just honesty. The same honesty that had carried him across 3 years of misunderstanding and all the way back home. Ruth felt herself smile, slowly, naturally, the way a sunrise arrives without asking permission. "That's good," she said softly. Isaiah finally looked at her. "Why?" "Because neither do I." For a moment, neither moved. Then they laughed quietly. Not because anything was funny, because sometimes happiness arrives so gently that laughter is the only thing waiting for it. Months later, summer settled over Dry Willow Valley. A freight wagon rolled down Main Street. The churchyard echoed with children's voices. The telegraph office stood freshly painted. A new sign hung above the door. Ruth stepped outside to straighten it after a gust of wind. Across the street, Isaiah's horse waited beside the hitching rail. Patient. Familiar. Home. Ruth looked across the valley. The same hills, the same roads, the same town. Yet everything felt different. Once this place had been filled with unanswered questions. Now it held something else. Something built slowly, carefully, honestly. And as the afternoon sun settled across Dry Willow Valley, the life that had almost been stolen from them finally belonged to them again. I think that's why this story stays with us. Not because of the letters, not because of the land, not even because Isaiah and Ruth finally found their way back to each other. It stays with us because deep down, most of us know what it feels like to lose time. To look back and wonder what might have happened if one conversation had gone differently, if one misunderstanding had been cleared up, if one person had simply stayed. And maybe that's why Ruth and Isaiah feel so real. If you were standing where Ruth stood, carrying years of unanswered questions, would you have found the courage to trust again? If you were Isaiah, would you have returned home and faced the pain you left behind? There's something beautiful about the way they chose each other in the end. Not through grand promises, not through perfect circumstances, but through patience, honesty, and the willingness to begin again. Sometimes healing doesn't arrive all at once. Sometimes it comes quietly, like spring water finding its way through stone after a long winter. And maybe the lesson isn't about lost years at all. Maybe it's about refusing to let bitterness have the years that remain. I'd love to know your thoughts. If you were Ruth or Isaiah, what would have been the hardest thing to forgive? And if stories like this leave a little warmth in your heart, I hope you'll join me again. There are many more forgotten roads, hidden truths, and healing journeys waiting just ahead, and I'd be honored to share them with you.